to Günther Quandt, a super rich industrialist in 1930s Germany. Today, your family dynasty owns brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz. And in the 1930s, you were doing great. You were at the top of your game. But then something unfortunate happens. A certain guy with a small mustache takes over Germany. And with Hitler came a lot of instability and eventually war. And even though you may not agree with everything that Hitler says, or maybe you do, you don't really care either way. You're a businessman, not a politician. Can't a man just make a Reichsmark in peace? You're not trying to stir the pot with this new government, you just want to make money. So you do the only thing you can do to keep your business running. You become a Nazi. You publicly buy into Hitler's vision for the world. You donate to his political party, you manufacture his weapons. Basically, you do the exact same thing as every American defense contractor today, except you do it for Hitler. And in return, you become Hitler's most beloved tycoon. You receive contract after contract, worth millions of Reichsmarks. And you were the first in line to buy whatever Jewish businesses you wanted for a fraction of what they were really worth. And the best part about supporting a dictator is that you got to use thousands of Jewish laborers in your factories. Free labor. And once the war was over, even though Germany lost, you found yourself wealthier than ever before. But you're not in the clear yet, because now the Allied powers were going after everyone that supported Hitler's deeds. So if you don't want to spend the rest of your life in prison, or to see all of your wealth get taken from you, you would have to think fast. You would have to make it seem like you were never a Nazi at all. You would have to make everyone forget that you supported the most evil man on earth. And it was from this that you pulled off the greatest rebranding of all time. Think about it, when you hear the name Mercedes-Benz today, you don't think Nazi war machine, you think luxury, class, the G-Wagon. When you hear the name BMW, you also don't think of the Nazi war machine. You think about going to the mechanic because of how terribly unreliable they are. No one driving your cars today ever thinks about how they're inadvertently enriching the families who supported Hitler every step of the way. And this is how you pull it off. And if you're thinking right now, well, this Quandt guy probably died years ago, you can't be holding his family responsible for what he did. Well, think again. Because not only did his family do everything in their power to hide his Nazi ties from the public, just like he did, they're also not apologizing for any of it. And they are far from the only wealthy German families like this. This video is based on the book Nazi Billionaires, The Dark History of Germany's Wealthiest Dynasties by David de Jong. We'll link it below. So stay dangerous and let's get into it. It's pretty incredible that the Quandt's family wealth has survived this long. That's because one thing I quickly realized after meeting a lot of rich people is that knowing how to make money is one thing, but having the self-control to not blow it all and actually grow your wealth is a totally different ballgame. And that is why rich people always use financial advisors. For example, as I started making money, I had no idea whether or not to use a Roth IRA or a 401k, or how much money I should contribute every month. I had no idea what insurance to get, and Googling often led to conflicting answers. It would have been real nice to have a financial advisor to go to who has a legal responsibility to act in my best interests. The problem is financial advisors typically cost $2,000 to $7,500 per year. But luckily, that is where Domain Money comes in, today's paid sponsor. For just $79 a month, Domain Money gives you your own certified financial advisor who can help you with your investing, savings, insurance, taxes, family planning, all without hidden fees or investment minimums. Basically, Domain's advisors let you not stress about your finances, so you can focus on what you're good at for a tiny fraction of the cost. And Domain even has a 6% APY savings account, which is 13 times the national average, and they will prepare and file your taxes for you. So if you want to see if Domain Money is right for you, click the link below and match with your financial guide today. Scroll down and click the link below now. Born into a wealthy German family in 1881, you, Günther Quandt, were groomed to take over the family textile business from a young age. Under your leadership, the family business supplied the German army with uniforms during World War I, which meant that the more the German soldiers died, the more new uniforms the military would need. And so from early on, Germany's loss became the Quandt's gain. But you weren't satisfied with just one big win. You had bigger dreams for yourself, and none of them included being just somewhat wealthy. You wanted to be a magnate, a tycoon. You wanted everyone in Germany to know your name. But to do that, you would have to expand. And luckily, you had the perfect opportunity. By the time World War I was over and the Great Depression was around, you were already swimming in money. So as thousands of businesses across Europe went under, you stood ready, inflated cash in wheelbarrow to buy them all up. And as the years went on, you just became more and more obsessed. You were so focused on money and nothing else that in 1929, your wife Magda decided that she had enough and asked you for a divorce, taking your son Harold with her. And that's where your first interest in the Nazi Party was sparked. You see, Magda didn't waste any time finding herself a new husband. In September 1930, she attended a party meeting where a man named Joseph Goebbels spoke. Goebbels was one of Hitler's closest friends and would later become the chief of the Nazis' propaganda department. And for Magda, it was love at first sight. Over the next few months, she went out of her way to get close with Goebbels, and by mid-1931, they got engaged. And as Magda's ex-husband, you couldn't help but be interested in the beliefs of the new man she was marrying. And as one of the richest businessmen in Germany, you had caught Hitler's attention too. See, before Hitler became the leader of Germany, he didn't have a ton of money lying around to use for his campaign and party. He needed outside funding. And who better to go to than the rich German businessman who liked his views? So in February 1931, you were invited to meet Hitler for the first time. You were one of dozens of businessmen Hitler asked for money from, and even though you didn't see any harm in offering Hitler a few million Reichsmarks, you honestly didn't think he would make it that far. Quote, I can't say that Hitler made a significant or meaningless, a sympathetic or repulsive impression on me. He struck me as perfectly average, end quote, you later wrote. But in just a few short years, you would be very impressed at just how high Hitler would climb. As Magda's ex-husband, people assumed that you would be the last person to want to get involved in her wedding with Joseph Goebbels, but they were wrong. Magda may have been your ex, but in her new marriage you saw opportunity to get close to Hitler. See, by late 1931, you had realized that Hitler wasn't just some wannabe politician, he was really gaining supports. Maybe getting on his good side wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. So when Magda and Goebbels announced their plans to get married, you didn't just offer them your congratulations, you actually invited them to host their wedding on your family estates. How generous, right? It was a genius move, because Joseph Goebbels' best man turned out to be none other than Hitler himself, putting you right back on his radar as the only logical rich German he could trust and turn to for help. Over the next year, you kept growing your relationship with Hitler in secret. The Nazi Party hadn't won any elections yet, and you weren't about to gamble your reputation in business on a maybe. But you wouldn't keep it a secret for very long, because in 1933, Hitler actually did it. He became Chancellor of Germany, the equivalent of President or Prime Minister. And with the Nazi Party in power, there was no need to hide your support anymore. So shortly after Hitler took over, you officially became a member of the Nazi Party. And when Hitler announced that he would be rearming Germany in violation of the agreement it signed after World War I, you were one of the first companies in line to receive those contracts. Guns, ammunition, uniforms, and batteries were just some of the few things you produced and sold to the German military. By 1937, Hitler appointed you as one of the leaders of Germany's military economy, meaning that you were now one of the rich businessmen approved and trusted by the new German government. And with this new title and influence, you expanded your business more than ever before. But just as you were reaching the peak of your money, power, and influence, World War II broke out. And while the war was horrifying for some, for you all you saw was one giant opportunity. You already knew just how profitable war could be after making millions during the First World War. But back then, you had just been a regular businessman in charge of a regular company. But now you were part of Hitler's chosen few, his inner circle of businessmen who were offered every contract and deal first. And nothing could have prepared you for the amount of money you would be making over the next 6 years. One of your first big contracts was for weapons, bullets, rifles, pistols. The demand for these basic wartime supplies was so high that within a few months, the stock price for your weapons company would shoot up by 300%. Another one of your companies, AFA, went the same way. As a battery manufacturer, AFA was contracted to sell thousands of batteries to the German military for its submarines, torpedoes, and rockets. And then there were the good old uniforms. Just like in World War I, your company was chosen to supply German soldiers with their distinctive Nazi uniforms. And with more than 17 million soldiers having joined the German military by 1945, your coffers were overflowing. And as Gunter Quant, you could have stopped here. You were already rich, powerful, and successful beyond your wildest dreams. Everyone in Germany knew your name. But like most people who profit from war, you just got greedy. As the war raged on, you started hearing stories of other German businessmen taking over Jewish companies and making them their own, and you just couldn't resist the temptation. And so you and your son Herbert Quandt got to work. Over the 6 years of World War II, thousands of successful Jewish people were forced to flee Europe. To finance their escape, many of them chose to sell their companies to Germans before they left. And since most of the Jewish people were desperate to leave, you could easily buy up companies for a fraction of what they were actually worth. Jewish people were forced to sell their businesses for an 80% discount. The Germans called this type of hostile takeover Aryanization, and it happened all over Europe in the 1930s and 40s. But even this was not the worst thing you did either, because before the war ended, you would make one more move that would cement your reputation as one of Europe's most brutal businessmen. As more and more Germans were forced to enlist in the army, German businesses including yours were facing a labor shortage. But luckily for you, you knew just where to get a steady supply of cheap or even free workers. The Jewish camps, obviously. Over the next 6 years of World War II, you would use around 50,000 forced laborers in your weapons factories. And as you can imagine, the conditions were so bad that we can't get into specifics without getting demonetized. Needless to say, this was a psychotically profitable move. But all good things must come to an end. And yours finally did in 1945, when Hitler allegedly took his own life, marking the end of World War II. For the past 12 years, you held on to the hope that maybe Hitler would actually win, and you would be able to enjoy your spoils in peacetime. But now the Allies and the Soviet Union controlled Germany, which meant that you needed to save face. So you flipped. You and your sons Herbert and Harold did everything in your power to hide your Nazi party membership. You told everyone who would listen to you that you had always disapproved of the party's plans, but that just wasn't enough. In 1946, you were arrested for your participation in Germany's war efforts, and so you blamed it all on Joseph Goebbels. You said that he had forced you to join the party, and that he was framing you. You were completely innocent. But little did you know that Joseph Goebbels had already died from the war, along with your ex-wife and their 6 children. It wasn't a good look. It looked like you would spend the rest of your life in jail, but somehow you got lucky. Less than a year after your arrest, you were released. According to the judge, you may have been a Nazi party member, but you actually didn't take an active part in any of the crimes? Well, if only they knew. Free at last, you took control of the Quandt family dynasty again. And then you trained your 2 sons, Herbert and Harold, to take over once you died. Both Herbert and Harold have been complicit in your crimes. Herbert even helped plan and build one of those famous camps in Poland, while Harold served in the German Air Force throughout World War II. But unlike you, your sons weren't as well known, which meant fewer people knew of their dark past. In 1955, Gunther Quandt died on holiday in Egypt. The weapons manufacturing side of the company went to Harold, while the rest of the business was left to Herbert, the son who has supported him through it all, forced labor and camps included. And just like Gunther, Herbert had big dreams for his family's business. While Gunther Quandt was making billions from the war, another company was doing just as well, BMW. For most of the 1930s and 40s, BMW has switched from a car and motorcycle manufacturer to a makeshift weapons producer. Like the Quandts, BMW realized that the real money in any war was in the guns and ammo. And just like the Quandts, BMW was more than happy to use forced labor in its factories. Maybe they bonded over their love for free forced labor, or they bonded over their deep Nazi roots, but when BMW ran out of money in 1960, Herbert Quandt was the first man they turned to. Like his dad, Herbert knew an opportunity when he saw it. And so in 1960, he and the rest of the Quandt family became majority shareholders in BMW. Over the next few years, Herbert would transform BMW into one of the most successful car manufacturers in the world. He would also use all his money and influence to ensure that no one ever found out about his questionable past. And surprisingly, it worked. When you have enough money to buy up news companies, bribe researchers, and make entire history books disappear, refurbishing the truth becomes easy. For decades, Herbert and Harold were allowed to enjoy all their ill-gotten gains in peace. And when they eventually died, their children simply took over where they left off, with a net worth of over $38 billion, while pretending that they have no idea what their father and grandfather have done. But they couldn't escape forever. In 2007, a documentary film about the Quandt's crimes was released to the public, and all around the world, people were furious. The 2 Quandt heirs, Stefan and Suzanne, were straight up Germany's wealthiest family, So as damage control, the two quants commissioned an independent study into their family's history. But when the research came back confirming everything the documentary said, they didn't really seem to care either. All Stefan had to say was that they were distancing themselves from their father and grandfather, and that doing so was massive and painful. Obviously, how sorry can they really feel about what their family did? But it didn't matter anyways, because by the time the Quant family was exposed, BMW was already one of the biggest car manufacturers on Earth. Same thing with Mercedes-Benz. And so that's it. That is how you get away with being part of one of the most evil war machines ever. But the worst part is that the Quant family is far from alone. This is Ferdinand Porsche. Many people know him as the genius engineer behind one of the world's best car brands. But what they don't realize is that, like Gunther Quandt, Ferdinand Porsche jumped at the chance to work for Germany's murderer-in-chief. And he didn't care who he had to backstab in the process. In 1933, Hitler gave a speech praising Germany's car designers and engineers as geniuses. In response, Ferdinand Porsche personally sent Hitler a telegram saying that he and his staff were ready to put, quote, their will and ability at the disposal of the German people, end quote. And so Hitler put them to work. While still producing their special brand of racing cars, Porsche was also tasked with designing and building the first Volkswagen. Hitler's vision was to produce a German car for the German people at a low cost of less than 1,000 Reichsmarks, or about $8,200 today. But there was just one problem. The co-founder of Porsche's company was Jewish, a guy named Adolf Rosenberger, who had been their main financial backer. And there was no way Hitler was going to put his stamp of approval on a car with any ties to the Jewish people. But luckily, Ferdinand had an easy fix. While Hitler was going after the Jewish people, Rosenberger had decided to move to America while he still could. So Porsche and his son-in-law Anton offered to buy their old friend and partner out of the company. And as expected, Ferdinand Porsche had all the leverage. He knew Rosenberger was in no position to negotiate, so he offered to buy Rosenberger out of the company for pennies on the dollar. For Rosenberger, it was either take the deal and live, or risk getting killed. So the choice was obvious. Ferdinand gave Rosenberger shares to his son Ferry, and so in 1935, Porsche finally became a 100% German company, ready to carry out Hitler's orders. Ferry Porsche even went so far as to voluntarily join the SS, the equivalent of Hitler's Secret Service. And if that wasn't enough, just like the Quants, Porsche jumped at the chance to use cheap forced labor in their factories once the war started. Anton, Porsche's son-in-law, said he didn't have a choice. He said he had to resort to forced labor if the company ever wanted to produce Hitler's Volkswagen for that insanely cheap price. He didn't think about the fact that many of those forced laborers were also mass-producing weapons for the German army at the time. So when World War II ended, Ferdinand, Ferry, and Anton all ended up in jail for their ties to the German war machine. Ferry, the guy who actually joined the SS, got out after just 6 months and took back control of his father's company. Later, Anton and Ferdinand would get out too. But with Germany losing and Hitler long gone, the Porsche and Volkswagen companies would also have to do some serious rebranding. But luckily, they rebranded so well that today the Ferry Porsche Foundation is one of the biggest donors to the University of Stuttgart, Germany, where the history department of that university released a study on Porsche's Nazi past that happens to leave a lot of the family's crimes out. Today, the history of the Porsche brand is something most Germans choose to ignore, considering the Porsche family now controls car brands like Audi, Bentley, and Lamborghini too. Dozens of German families like the Quants and Porsches made their fortunes thanks to Hitler and World War II. And even though America and Britain made a big show of arresting and punishing them for their crimes, they didn't bring as many of these families to justice as you may think. Most of you know about Operation Paperclip. After World War II, the US brought over a bunch of Nazi officers and scientists to help them win the Cold War, but what you may not know is that Britain was even worse. See, long before World War I and II, Europe's wealthy families all kind of knew each other. The British families would do business with the German ones, they would go to the same ski resorts, attend the same events, their kids probably went to the same schools too. So when it came time for the British to identify and punish German dynasties that benefited from the Nazi party, they just didn't. They would even go out of their way to make sure their friends who were arrested were set free. And since the British, who were supposed to be Germany's biggest enemy, were literally vouching that these families were innocent, everyone just kinda accepted that they probably were. So the same Hitler supporters that should have spent the rest of their lives in jail, they got to keep their companies, they got to keep their money, and they got to keep their influence over the German economy and governments. Today, none of these families have really owned up to what their grandparents did, or have tried to do right with the families they hurt. The best they could do was add a few lines on their company's websites talking about how they deeply regret what their grandparents had to do in their situation. And you want to know who else might have got away with it? Hitler. See, the official narrative is that Hitler took his own life in his bunker as Berlin was getting captured by the Soviets, and that the Soviets found his dead body shortly after. And that's it. Hitler is confirmed dead. But did you know that no one actually ever saw Hitler's dead body? Did you know that even his closest associates only ever saw a body rolled up in a rug with only the top of his head and shoes showing? Did you know that Hitler notoriously had used more than 24 body doubles to stand in for him at events? And that one body double was even shot and killed by Soviet soldiers and was actually mistaken for Hitler for a while before anyone got a good look at him? Did you know that the piece of skull that the Soviets claimed to be Hitler's was actually identified by a DNA test to belong to a woman in 2009? Did you know that after the war, the FBI was spending millions of dollars a year sending FBI agents all over the world to find out if Hitler was in fact dead? And that in 2017, a set of heavily redacted FBI documents were declassified, with one of the documents being a report from a man who allegedly helped 6 top Argentinian officials bring Hitler to Argentina via submarine? So if you consider all of that, the question becomes, isn't it reasonable to assume that a man like Hitler, with his motivations and his resources, would have planned to fake his own death? And if he did survive, where did he go? How did he escape? The answer to these questions lies possibly in South America, where today there are straight up German towns with German architecture and German cultural festivals filled with descendants of former Nazis.
And now we're removed 70 to 80 years from the facts. It has been painful to try to use real science, real investigative tools to try to sift through this lore.
Studying this for how long now?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
If you had a guess, if you had like $1 million, you got to put it on one side or another. Did he go there?
Yeah.
And we investigate it all in our new private documentary that you can watch right now by clicking the card on the screen. This documentary is part of our YouTube membership, where we post documentaries that are too controversial to be posted publicly, and we've got a ton of great ones out already. These documentaries will never be posted anywhere else. You are gonna love this one on Hitler's death, and you can watch it right now by clicking the card on the screen. Stay dangerous, and we'll see you in the next one.